All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm very excited today to have Mary Pat Jacobs of Apply Point join us to share her expertise in everything to do with grad school admissions. Because as
All
I've often
right.
said,
Well, hello,
oh,
everyone.
sorry,
I'm
here we go. That's
very
better.
excited today.
Getting a little reverb. As I've often said, my expertise is standardized testing, but Mary Pat has a much wider view of this world, and I'm very excited to have her. So, thanks for joining us, Mary Pat.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And I would love if you could just introduce yourself and Apply Point and kind of how you help students who are applying to grad school.
Absolutely. So first, I just want to say we love working with our MBA applicants. They're at such an exciting time in their life, about to embark on a really, really meaningful adventure. Um, so we love it. Anyway, I started Apply Point about 13 years ago. We work with applicants to graduate programs in medicine, law, and business with things like school selection strategy, recommendation management, essay content development, essay editing, resume construction, and interview prep. Um, my background is in admissions and journalism, so I actually particularly love the storytelling aspect of this work. And that's about 80% of what we do. I think when we start working with clients, they realize very quickly that their story, how they articulate, their evolutions in perspective, how they articulate those experiences that are going to help show the admissions committee their abilities in innovation, leadership, and teamwork. It's such a big part of the process, and that's really what's going to push them over the edge.
And I have to say, as a test prep person, one of the first questions I ask students is, "Are you getting any bigger picture advice here?" Because I have a very narrow focus, but it really does help to have someone with a bird's eye view of all the pieces that go into an application, and even giving me guidance about what score goals we're actually aiming for. So you mentioned, and it sounds like the majority, if not plurality, of your students are MBA. Is that right?
Well, we do work with applicants to graduate programs in medicine, law, and business.
Mhm.
So MD applicants, mostly allopathic MD programs in the United States, but also osteopath as well as offshore. In addition to that, law school applicants, both full-time, and there are some part-time programs out there for law school, as well as MBA. So full-time, part-time, and executive programs.
Got it. I would say most of my students tend to be on the MBA side, so I thought we might zoom in on that a little bit
Yes. Oh, I love it.
and
Yeah.
maybe get your take on what the current MBA landscape looks like. Specifically, sort of what skills are schools looking for now as opposed to what they were looking for 10 years ago, which now feels like an eternity ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. And honestly, not much has changed.
Hmm.
Admissions committees still are looking to make sure an applicant can compete in their rigorous academic environment. They're still looking to be sure that there's a solid quantity and quantity of full-time post-baccalaureate work experience. When I say quantity, I mean going into a full-time two-year MBA program, 4 years of work experience is about what they want. It's about an average of that of applicants going in. And when I say quality, they want to be sure that there's a lot of examples of an applicant, proving their abilities in the areas of, like I said, innovation and or leadership and or teamwork. Also, they really want to make sure that the applicant's going to be compatible in the close-knit and collaborative program that is their business school. Even a school like Harvard, it's huge. There's 900 students per class. But even at a school like Harvard, they're going to divide the students down into small groups of 100 and then further down into small groups of 4. So even at big schools, it really is a close-knit and collaborative experience for the students.
Got it. Got it. And then, putting together an application, there are so many pieces. And I know that you tend to help with all of them, but letters of rec and personal statements and um, uh, interview. Uh, is there one, or maybe we could call it like an order of operations that people should follow, or is it all sort of one big soup of of material that makes someone look the best?
Yeah. I really do believe that all the pieces come together and they all serve their purpose to paint a holistic picture of the applicant. I would say that like for recommendation letters, most schools require them. Most of the time they're always full of flowers and sunshine, right? Nobody's going to ask someone to write a letter of recommendation for them if they think it might even be remotely negative. So I
Sure.
would say in terms of differentiating applicants, recommendation letters, it's not my favorite way to do it, right? But there is a way to do them right. So we do provide guidance in that area. But no, I think generally all the pieces come together to paint a very important holistic picture of the applicant.
Sure. Well, that's great. And then, I mean, most relevant, I would say, to my audience is the standardized testing piece. And I know that the world has changed in its view of standardized testing, like back and forth. Um, how, I guess the bluntest way to ask this question is like, how important are standardized tests? And specifically, looking at the MBA world, maybe the GRE GMAT breakdown, like decision whether I should take the GRE or the GMAT. Do schools value one over the other? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question too. Really, both the GMAT and the GRE are created equal in the eyes of admissions directors. Though the general advice goes, if you're better at math, take the GMAT. If you're better at verbal, take the GRE. I will say there's also a third test, the executive assessment. It was really designed for part-time and executive MBA programs, but now there's even some full-time programs that take it. So sometimes if an applicant can't quite get the GRE or GMAT score they're looking for, I'll say, you know what, sit for the EA and let's see what happens. And the full-time 2-year MBA programs that take the executive assessment are Carnegie Mellon, Case Western, Columbia Business School, University of Virginia, Duke, Fordham, Georgetown, NYU, UCLA, and Vanderbilt. So there's quite a few. There's many more as well, but those are the most common programs that our applicants will be applying to.
Sure. And then, so recently, both tests, both the GRE and the GMAT, have changed. I like to say they're kind of like the Pepsi and Coke of standardized tests, right? Like one tries something new, the other one has to catch up.
Right.
And it's the dust is, at least from what I'm seeing, is sort of still settling on comparing these scores to each other, comparing these scores to previous versions of the test. What are you hearing about how admissions committees are, I don't know, handicapping new scores versus old scores? How is that playing out?
Yeah. So they really will look ultimately at the percentile scores, though it's important to note that the GMAT focus, if you get, for example, a 645 on the GMAT focus, that is equivalent to a 700 on the old test.
Mhm.
So it's a lower score on the GMAT focus is actually fine. So oftentimes people say, oh, I got a 645 on the GMAT focus. I really want to get a 700. I'm like, no, you're fine. Actually, as long as you break a 645 on the GMAT focus, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. And those, I mean, those old numbers I feel are still seared into people's kind of
Yeah.
like mind. And
Even
I
for admissions directors, it
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Now, f- for whom specifically is standardized testing important? Because, and I can certainly speak to this. I see I'll say like the typical MBA applicant, someone who's put in a few solid years at a very good consulting firm, but maybe doesn't have a ton of work experience. And then I have professionals who've been, out of the work or out of school for 10, 15 years, and they have much more to kind of fall back on in their application. When you're working with a new applicant, how do you decide how important standardized testing is going to be to their overall package?
Mhm. Standardized tests generally are most important for those applicants who really haven't proven their abilities in the areas of sort of, well, their abilities in, analytical and quantitative pursuits. One of the great things about business school is that there's a wide array of industries and educational backgrounds represented in a 2-year full-time MBA program. That's the fun of it. We've worked with professional golfers, opera singers, actors, artists, but it's for those people that it's the most important for. There's not going to be a ton of other ways the admissions committee is going to be able to gauge their abilities, right, in the analytical or quantitative realm. There aren't likely going to be a ton of quantitative courses on their transcript, not a ton of analytical full-time 2-year, full-time post-baccalaureate work experience. So yeah, I would say it's generally for non-traditional, it's seemingly non-traditional applicants, but MBA programs want them. So if you're non-traditional, don't worry about it. There are ways, just, as I'm talking about the standardized test, to prove yourself, to prove your abilities, that you can succeed in a rigorous academic, quantitative and analytical environment.
Got it. Now to kind of like a, I don't know, bigger picture question.
Yep.
I assume people who come to you have already decided like an MBA is the way to go, but for anyone who's still kind of in that like discernment process of this is something that I'm interested in doing and think that I have a good shot at getting into a good program, but like why should I or do I want an MBA? What do you see as the real value of an MBA?
The MBA is still immensely valuable. I was doing a little research. I found this great quote on LinkedIn. It reads, "The percentage of senior leaders hired each year with an MBA degree has increased by 25% globally since 2010. And the growth isn't just among those looking to climb the corporate ladder. The percentage of entrepreneurs with a degree has increased even more, surging 45% over the same time period." So this data shows that the degree is hardly a relic of the past, right? But it does depend where you go. And there's 4 big things to consider when you're thinking about choosing an MBA program. Number 1, it must be AACSB accredited. That is non-negotiable. All of the schools within the top tier and the second tier and the third tier, usually they are, but that's something to make sure. Number 2, rankings. Rankings don't mean everything, but they mean something. When you're going back to school and you're not getting a license to do something like you are in medical school, law school, there's no board or bar to pass at the end of your MBA program. The rankings mean something, and it's worth considering. Another thing to consider, career placement. Dig into that career placement PDF that career placement offices at MBA programs put out on their websites. You want to be sure that the companies that you're interested are coming to campus. You want to be sure that companies you're interested and roles you're interested in are reflected in the employment report for their interns and their graduates. That's huge. If you don't see that there, look somewhere else. Finally, and this may seem a little silly, but geography. If you know you want to live and work in New York City after you graduate, not a bad idea to look at Columbia and NYU. Your networking opportunities will be endless. So.
Yeah, and speaking from personal experience in my undergrad, from my undergrad experience, I went to school in DC, and the ability to do internships during the school year, right? If it's a full-time program for an MBA, it is just invaluable because otherwise, and I guess now, since everything's a little more remote, there's more opportunities. But whenever high school students, when I was doing SAT, would ask me about the benefits of going to school in a city versus like, and I won't name names, but like schools that are way out there, yeah, there certainly is something to that. Well, shifting a little bit here, I'd love to get your take because everyone is always talking about AI now. It's kind of like the buzzword. What are you? I want to try to ask you like a specific question, but maybe I'll just throw the prompt at you, AI, and you can let us know how that's affecting business school instruction, but more relevant to like our audience here, the application process. How can people use AI tools? Should they highlight AI experience in their application? What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, AI, you're right. Everybody is talking about it. And applicants should not talk about it just because they think it's what admissions committees want to hear, just because they think it's trendy and cool. You only want to talk about something in your application where you have significant academic and professional experience in, right? Admissions committees are only interested in mostly in those experiences from the start of college and after that's going to show your abilities in those areas I keep mentioning, innovation and leadership and teamwork. They're most interested in those experiences that are going to prove that, well, those experiences that reinforce your interest in an MBA, those experiences that reinforce your interest in your short-term goals. So what you've done before is far more important than what you say you want to do going forward. So again, if your background, if your experience doesn't have any AI experience at all in it, don't talk about it. It has to have legs if you're going to talk about it in your application. And of course, the elephant in the room here is essay writing, right? Do not use AI to write your essays. Admissions committees will know about it. This is why Harvard now is paying a little bit more attention to the essay portion of the GMAT. And people don't realize this, but voice is quite distinctive. So if your voice in the GMAT essay is quite different from the voice in the essays that you're submitting, it's a red flag. So don't do that. Yeah, it's very important to to keep that in mind.
I think it's a good principle for life not to talk about things that you don't know about, right? Not just when you're applying to MBA programs, but I think I'll take that as like a good guiding principle for everything. So big stressor, I think, for a lot of applicants is the interview prep process. Because if you're, let's say, like a little bit of an introvert, your standardized testing is done in a little shell. Your essay writing can be done in a little shell. The letters of rec are presumably people that you feel comfortable with. But with interviews, you're right there looking like into the eyes of the admissions committee. And so how do you work with students, and what general tips do you provide when preparing for interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So with interviews, business schools will only interview those applicants they deem as viable candidates for admission. So if you get an interview, it's great news. That means that at that point, that is the most important piece of the puzzle. And we can help you with full interview prep. Most interviews at business schools are behavioral. When I say behavioral, it's very similar to those interviews that you've probably had for other academic programs you've applied to, for jobs that you've applied to. The questions, right? It's tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume, tell me about a time that you had to challenge the group consensus, tell me about a time when you came up with an imaginative solution to a problem. The important thing with behavioral interviews is basically to come up with stories for almost every single one of your responses. For example, if you're asked about your greatest strengths, don't just list them. Tell me a story that's going to show me those strengths in action. Stories are great because not only does everybody love a good story, right? Not only it's going to make the interview much more interesting for the interviewer, but it's also going to prepare you to pivot if you're asked a question that is not on the list of questions that you've been preparing. So, for example, like if you're asked a question about your management style, you may be able to use the very same anecdote for a question on how you manage conflict. So if you have this big inventory of all these nice anecdotes trimmed to between 1.5 to 3 minutes, which is where we want your responses for interviews to be at time-wise, you're going to have a lot to draw from. Also very, very important, read the news, be informed. I was always shocked when, as an admissions director, I would ask applicants their opinion on certain stories in the business news or what their thoughts were. And they would look at me bewildered in some cases. So it's so important if you're going to be a student of business to have a knowledge of what's going on in the world.
That's good. And I assume your advice about AI still applies to this. So like if if you're interviewing over Zoom or something, I don't even know what you would do. Don't hire like a deep fake AI of yourself to answer questions for you.
Yeah, right. Yes, yes.
I don't know. I mean, I
About
think,
that today. That's very interesting. Yeah, yeah. That's what's so funny.
yeah.
No.
Well, how about, so you mentioned sort of the standard ones, right? Like tell me about yourself, tell me about, time you challenged the group consensus. Have you ever heard of any curveball questions that really stump people?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. For the most part, while I loved it when applicants I was interviewing we could talk about what was going on in the world, I never wanted to make them uncomfortable. I never wanted to trick them. Right. So admissions committee members are never looking to throw you a curveball. There are some questions that I believe are a sign of an inexperienced interviewer. Things like, if you could have lunch with anyone living or dead, who would it be and why? If you could be any kind of superhero, who would you be and why? If you're stranded on a desert island, what three things would you want in your pocket? I just don't think questions like that are in any way valuable in terms of evaluating an applicant's potential.
Mm,
Perhaps thinking critically on their feet under pressure, right? If someone gives a quite a clever response, it could be interesting. But for the most part, I think questions like that are the sign coming from an inexperienced interviewer, but you could get them. So it's important to be aware of it.
sure. Well, and I know Wharton has a particularly interesting way of interviewing applicants. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So Wharton is one of the exceptions to the behavioral interview, though they will have a behavioral component as part of sort of the interview process. But the first step is Wharton's team-based discussion. We can prepare our applicants extensively for this. The most important thing to remember is you really want to listen to and empower your colleagues. There'll be about three others in the room who are also applicants. You don't want to bulldoze them. Admissions committees are going to be looking for your ability to collaborate meaningfully with others. Your colleagues, well, your teammates are your colleagues, not your competition. That's really the biggest thing to remember, but we can prepare our applicants extensively for that.
Sure, sure. Um, and then the other item that I wanted to talk about was scholarships because applying to to grad school is not always a cheap process, but financial aid and scholarships can really make it worth it. So what sort of I don't know, roadmaps do you give? How do you help people maximize scholarships?
Yeah, I love talking about scholarships because I love when our applicants get money from schools. So your application, when you apply to business school, is your application for admission as well as merit-based scholarships. 99% of the scholarships given for MBA programs are merit-based. And it's awesome. And full-time 2-year programs give a lot of merit-based aid. So, and it's negotiable. So we will absolutely guide our applicants through that process.
That's so important to remember. I think for every part of everything, really, is that everything is always negotiable, right?
Yes, and
Can't hurt
it's such
that.
a good feeling when applicants call us and they say, I got in and I got this much money. That's really the best part of our job.
Yeah, I had a friend. Again, this was back in undergrad, who on paper like was really on track for this particular scholarship and didn't get it and decided to follow up because this was make or break. It was going to decide whether he could go to the program that he wanted to or not.
Mhm.
And when he called the office, it turned out that the fax machine on which he had sent his application in cut off like the half of the last page. And they reviewed it and found like, oh yeah, you absolutely. And that was the difference. That's what helped him get in. And so just being thorough, I guess, and following up and really
Oh,
making sure it's a
definitely.
no. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, all right. So I love to do sort of do's and don'ts. I mean, you have years of experience of this, so I'm sure you've seen everything, and certainly no need to like name specific cases, but maybe you can give some guidance on the best practices when applying
Yeah.
to programs.
Yes. So I will leave you with Apply Point's top 10 application do's and don'ts.
Oh, great.
I was talking to my colleagues in the office and we were coming up with our top 10 list. So we argued about it for a while, but we think these are the best top 10. So number 10, do not ask the CEO to write one of your letters of recommendation because you think it looks impressive, even though you've only crossed paths with him a few times in the elevator.
Mm.
Personal always beats prestige with recommendation letters. Your letter writers must be above you on an org chart, yes, but they should know you well and should be able to elaborate on your strengths and abilities with specific examples. That's super important. Number 9, do not write your own letters of recommendation. This should seem obvious. Even if your letter writer asks you to do so, do not write them. It's obviously unethical. Schools also have fraud detection software. And if the voice from your essays comes through in your recommendation letters and it's, if it's the same voice, it's going to seem a little bit fishy, right?
Mm.
Um, Number 8, this is a big one actually. Do not tell your whole life story in your essays. Resumes are for breadth, essays are for depth. In
Mm.
an essay, you really want to take the reader, on a deep dive that will allow them to come to their own conclusions on your abilities in the areas of, as I've said, innovation and or leadership and or teamwork. Number 7, do not talk about childhood experiences in essays. This is a big one. We get this all the time.
Mm.
Maturity is also a pillar of the business school application. Admissions committees are far more interested in those evolutions in perspective you've had as an adult, which they consider to be from the start of college onwards. Number 6, do not fill a resume with job descriptions. Each entry should be results driven. What results did you achieve? What impact did you have? What perspective did you gain? Number 5, a resume should be 1 page, no more, no exceptions. Even with someone with 6 to 10 years of work experience, 1 page. Number 4, do a few mock interviews before the real thing. You're going to feel much more confident and relaxed and will likely perform better. Number 3, do not tell schools where else you are applying. It is none of their business, and it can be held against you in both the admissions and scholarship allocation process. Number 2, do negotiate for additional scholarship money, especially if another similarly ranked school offered you more. Doesn't hurt. It's certainly not going to detract, right, from your candidacy. You already got in. And number 1, most importantly, enjoy the self-reflective nature of this process. The essays are such a fun journey. You will learn a lot about yourself before embarking on your MBA journey. A wonderful, wonderful adventure awaits you.
Fantastic. Well, and if you're comfortable, I would love if you have those written out, a copy of them to
Yeah,
share with anyone who's interested. Only if you're comfortable
absolutely.
sharing. Um, uh, Mary, where can people find you? How can they contact you? What's your online presence like?
Yes, absolutely. You can go to our website, www.applypoint.net, or email info@applypoint.net, and someone will get right back to you, and we can set up a call very promptly as soon as we get, in days after we get your email.
Fantastic. And I'll put that in the comments of this stream here so that anyone watching this after the fact can reach out. And well, I guess all that there is left to say is thank you very much for that insight. As you know, the the calendar is quickly approaching January here, and people are putting the finishing touches on their applications. Anything else you'd like to add before we break?
No, just that a lot of wonderful things are ahead of you. I think especially full-time programs, it's so beneficial, both from, of course, an academic standpoint, but also a personal standpoint. So what a wonderful thing, what wonderful things ahead for MBA applicants.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Mary. And
My
thanks
pleasure.
everyone for the time.